I didn't lose my mind when I found them, I found my purpose. Looking back, it's strange how the moments that threaten to shatter you can instead sharpen your focus, like a lens snapping into place. My name is Grant Whitaker, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 15 years, I've been a commercial airline pilot, a job that's given me stability in the sky even when the ground beneath me felt unsteady. This is the story of how my life took a detour I never expected and how I charted a new course from the wreckage. I've always been a man of routine. Up in the air, everything is predictable: takeoff, cruising altitude, landing. There's a checklist for every scenario, a protocol to follow. I'm good at keeping things steady, at staying calm when turbulence hits. People tell me I'm observant, maybe too much for my own good, and I suppose that's true. I notice details: the way a passenger grips the armrest during takeoff, the hum of an engine that's just slightly off. It's a habit that's kept me sharp in the cockpit. Down here, though, life doesn't come with a flight manual, and I've learned that the hard way. I've been married to Vivian for a decade. She's 35, poised, and ambitious, a woman who commands attention without even trying. When we met, she was a marketing executive with big dreams, and I was smitten by her energy. She had this way of lighting up a room, and I felt like the luckiest guy alive to be the one she chose. We were a team, or at least I thought we were, building a life in Miami where the ocean meets the skyline and ambition hangs thick in the air. But marriage isn't a straight flight path. My job kept me away for days at a time: London one week, Tokyo the next, and Vivian's career pulled her in its own direction. She thrived on late-night strategy sessions and networking events, while I was 30,000 feet above, chasing time zones. Over the years, we started to drift. I'd come home exhausted, my suitcase still packed with the faint smell of jet fuel, and she'd be on the couch, her phone glowing in her hand. Our conversations shrank to logistics: did you pay the electric bill, or I'll be gone until Thursday. I told myself it was normal, that every couple hits a plateau. I was wrong. Vivian started changing, subtly at first. She'd always been into fitness, but lately, she was obsessed, talking about mindfulness and quoting wellness gurus I'd never heard of. She joined a fancy gym downtown, the kind where membership costs more than my monthly car payment. She'd come home with this glow, her hair still damp from a shower, and I'd be too wiped out from a red-eye flight to ask much about it. "You should try it," she'd say, her voice bright. "It's transformative." I'd nod, promising to check it out, but I never did. Then there was her phone. It used to sit on the kitchen counter, open to the world, but now it was glued to her side, locked with a passcode I didn't know. At night, she'd set it face down on the nightstand, a small gesture that started to feel like a wall between us. I'm not the jealous type: trust is everything when you're apart as much as we were, but that little habit stuck with me, like a pebble in my shoe. I loved her, though. Even when we were out of sync, I believed in us. So when she told me she wanted to go on a solo yoga retreat to Tulum, Mexico, I didn't hesitate. "It'll be good for you," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter as she packed. A reset. She looked up from folding her leggings, her hazel eyes catching the light. "Yeah, I think it will be," she replied, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I chalked it up to stress and kissed her forehead, wishing her a safe trip. That was the turning point, though I didn't know it yet. The signs were there: her new obsession with self-care, the way she'd linger over her phone, the distance in her voice, but I was too busy keeping my own life on course to see them for what they were. I'm a pilot, after all. I'm trained to spot problems before they escalate, to adjust the controls and keep the plane steady. But this wasn't a flight I could navigate with a checklist. A few weeks before she left, we had a moment that stuck with me. It was late, and I'd just gotten back from a flight to Seattle. Vivian was in the living room, her legs tucked under her on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I dropped my bag by the door and joined her, the silence between us heavier than usual. "Grant," she said suddenly, not looking up, "do you ever feel like we're just coasting?" I frowned, caught off guard. "Coasting?" "You know, like we're roommates instead of," she trailed off, her fingers pausing over the screen. "You're always gone, and when you're here, it's like you're still halfway across the world." Her words hit me like a sudden drop in altitude. "I'm sorry, Viv," I said, reaching for her hand. "It's the job. You know that." "But I'll try harder," I promise. She nodded, squeezing my hand back, but her gaze drifted to the window. Maybe this retreat will help me clear my head, she murmured. We'll figure it out, I said, pulling her close. She rested her head on my shoulder, but there was a tension in her I couldn't ignore. A few days later, I drove her to Miami International Airport. She wore a flowy white dress, her suitcase packed with yoga mats and sunscreen. I hugged her goodbye, watching as she disappeared through security, her blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights. As I walked back to the parking garage, a strange unease settled in my chest, like the calm before a storm I couldn't yet see. That was the last time I saw her as the woman I thought I knew. Vivian left for Tulum, and I went back to my routine: flying, landing, repeat, unaware that my life was about to veer off course. Something was brewing, something I couldn't name yet, but it was there, whispering in the back of my mind. And soon, I'd find out what it was. I was slouched in the crew lounge at Miami International Airport, nursing a coffee that had gone cold while I scrolled through flight schedules on my tablet. Mike, my co-pilot, lounged across from me, his thumb flicking across his phone screen as he chuckled at something. Grant, you've got to see this Tulum video, some influencer posted it, and the place looks unreal. His voice carried that easy enthusiasm he always had when he stumbled across something new online. I glanced up, mildly curious. Tulum? That's where Vivian's at right now, doing her yoga thing. Mike grinned and slid his phone over the table toward me. Yeah, exactly, take a look. Guy's name is Jake, does travel stuff. I grabbed the phone and tapped play, expecting nothing more than postcard-worthy shots of beaches and sunsets. The video started with sweeping views of turquoise waves lapping against white sand, followed by a group doing yoga in the open air. Then the camera swung to a rooftop cabana where people sat cross-legged, eyes closed, meditating. My gaze snagged on a woman with blonde hair, draped in a loose white dress, sitting near the edge of the group. She looked too familiar. I zoomed in, my thumb unsteady, and spotted the small lotus tattoo on her ankle, a detail I traced with my fingers 1,000 times. That's Vivian, I said under my breath, barely audible. Mike leaned over, squinting at the screen. What, your wife? You serious? I didn't answer right away, my attention locked on the man beside her, a broad-shouldered guy with a confident smile, his arm resting casually around her shoulders. They weren't just sitting together, they were comfortable, intimate. Who's that? I asked, keeping my tone even despite the tightening in my chest. Mike shrugged, oblivious to the shift in my mood. Chase Kincaid, fitness guy, owns a bunch of gyms down here, big on Instagram or whatever. Chase Kincaid. The name lodged itself in my head, sharp and unwelcome. I slid the phone back to Mike, managing a tight-lipped smile that felt more like a grimace. Nice find, thanks for the heads up. He nodded, already back to scrolling. Yeah, might drag Lisa down there one of these days, looks like paradise. I stood, my chair scraping against the linoleum, and muttered something about needing the restroom before heading off. The crew bathroom was a small, tiled box with a flickering fluorescent light, and I locked the door behind me, leaning hard against the sink. My hands gripped the edges, knuckles whitening as I stared into the mirror, my face looked drawn, eyes hollowed out by what I'd just seen. This isn't happening, I said to myself, voice low and rough. Vivian with some gym rat in Tulum, cozying up like I didn't exist. It didn't add up with the woman I'd married, the one who'd laughed with me over takeout on late nights after my flights. I turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over my hands, trying to ground myself in the sensation. Maybe I'd misread it, maybe it was nothing, but the way she tilted her head toward him, the ease in her posture, told a different story. I needed more than a shaky video clip to go on, something concrete before I let this eat me alive. Later that night, alone in our house, I sat at my desk with my laptop glowing in the dark. The Miami skyline blinked outside the window, a distant hum of life that felt miles away from where I was mentally. I tracked down Jake's profile online, at Tulum Traveler, a guy with a knack for pretty shots and a decent following. Posing as a content curator for a non-existent travel blog, I typed out an email, "Hey Jake, loved your Tulum piece, any chance you'd share some raw footage for a feature we're working on?" He replied within an hour, eager and accommodating, attaching a link to the unedited files with a cheery note about exposure. I clicked the link, steeling myself as the clips loaded, each one a potential knife twist. The early footage was harmless beach pans, yoga poses, resort grounds, but then I hit the ones that mattered. Vivian strolling along the shore, her hand clasped in Chase's, their fingers laced tight. Another showed them paused mid-step, him pulling her close for a kiss that lingered too long to be anything but deliberate. A rooftop scene followed, the two of them clinking cocktail glasses, her face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in months. Then came the dancing, under a sky full of stars, their bodies pressed together, moving like they'd done it 100 times before. I kept watching, jaw tight, until a poolside clip stopped me cold. The audio was muffled, but I cranked the volume and leaned in. "So, does your husband know you're here?" Chase's voice, smug and teasing, cut through the background noise. Vivian's laugh came next, light and careless. "Of course not, he thinks I'm on a solo retreat to find myself." Chase edged closer, his tone dropping. "And have you?" She smirked, playful. "I think I'm finding something better." They toasted, glasses clinking, and he said, "To living in the moment." I froze the frame, their laughter echoing in my ears. She wasn't just stepping out, she was rewriting our life like it was a joke, and this Chase guy was in on it, grinning like he'd won something. I shut the laptop, the room plunging into shadow, and sat there, letting the silence settle over me like a weight. Vivian was still in Tulum, probably tangled up with him right now, thinking I was clueless back home. My phone buzzed on the desk, her latest text, "Having a great time. Miss you." I stared at it, a dry laugh slipping out before I could stop it. "Miss me, huh?" I typed back, "Glad you're enjoying it, see you when you're home." Sending it felt like setting a trap, though I wasn't sure yet what I'd do when it sprang. The anger was there, pulsing under my skin, but I shoved it down, letting my mind turn cold and clear instead. She'd made her choice, and Chase had played his part, knowing full well she was mine or had been. I wasn't about to unravel over this, not in front of her, not in front of anyone. Standing, I crossed to the window, gazing out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. A plan was taking shape, rough-edged but solidifying with every breath. They thought they could play me for a fool, but I'd show them I wasn't built to break. This was just the start, I'd see it through, step by calculated step, until they realized what they'd unleashed. The kitchen felt oppressively still as Vivian rolled her suitcase through the front door, the wheels scraping against the hardwood floor like an unwelcome announcement. She looked radiant, her skin bronzed from the Tulum sun, her hair catching the light in a way that made it seem almost deliberate, as if she'd planned every detail of her return to disarm me. She dropped her bag near the couch and moved toward me with open arms, her smile easy and unguarded. "Hey, you," she said, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that used to pull me in without effort. I didn't move, letting her arms close around me while my own stayed rigid at my sides, unwilling to give her the response she expected. She hesitated, pulling back just enough to search my face, her brow creasing with a flicker of confusion. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head as if she could read me like she always had. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, keeping my voice level despite the storm building inside me. "We need to talk, Viv." Her eyes shifted, a quick dart of uncertainty crossing them before she nodded and stepped back, resting her hip against the kitchen island with a casualness that felt forced. "Sure, what's up?" she said, her tone still light, like she could steer us away from whatever was coming. I slid my hand into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it with a swipe, watching her expression tighten as she tracked the movement. "I saw something interesting while you were gone," I said, letting the words hang there, heavy and unyielding. Her gaze flicked to the screen, then back to me, her face hardening into something guarded. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now, testing the waters. I opened the video Jake had sent me, the one showing her and Chase tangled together by the pool, their laughter spilling out like a taunt, and held the phone up so she couldn't look away. The sound filled the room, sharp and undeniable, and I watched her face pale, her mouth opening slightly as the reality of it sank in. "Grant," she began, but I stopped her, my voice cutting through hers with a cold edge I didn't bother to soften. "Don't. Just don't." She swallowed hard, her hands clutching the counter behind her, fingers digging into the edge as if it could anchor her. "It's not what it looks like," she said, the words rushing out too fast, tripping over each other. "We were just." "Just what?" I interrupted, my restraint faltering for a moment before I pulled it back, keeping my stare fixed on her.
Just fooling around while you turned our marriage into a joke?
She flinched, her eyes glistening as tears welled up, threatening to spill over. No, Grant, it wasn't like that, I swear, she said, her voice trembling now, pleading for me to believe her. I set the phone down on the counter, the video still looping, her betrayal playing out in endless repetition between us. Then tell me what it was like, Viv. Tell me how you ended up in Tulum with some guy, feeding me lies about a solo trip. She took a shaky breath, her hand trembling as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times but never like this. I was lonely, okay? You're always gone, jetting off to whatever job takes you next, and I'm stuck here, waiting for you to remember I exist. I needed someone, to make me feel like I mattered again. Her words landed hard, a jagged twist in my chest, but I kept my face blank, refusing to let her see the damage.
So your answer was to cheat on me? That's how you fix feeling lonely?
She shook her head, tears breaking free and trailing down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks in their wake.
It wasn't planned, Grant. It just happened.
Chase was there, and he paid attention to me, made me feel like I wasn't invisible.
You haven't done that in so long.
I let out a sharp laugh, the sound bouncing off the walls, bitter and unyielding. So it's my fault because I'm out there working, keeping this life going, and you get to justify screwing around with some guy who posts gym selfies for a living? Her voice cracked as she tried to push back.
No, that's not what I mean.
I was lost, and he was there. It was a mistake, a stupid, awful mistake. I folded my arms, leaning back against the counter, my eyes locked on hers with an intensity one knew she couldn't escape. She stepped forward, reaching for my arm, but I jerked away, her touch feeling like a violation I couldn't stomach.
Please, Grant, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you.
It was nothing serious, just a dumb fling. Her voice was desperate now, grasping at anything to pull me back. I stared at her, seeing the woman I'd built a life with but also someone I didn't know anymore, someone who'd rewritten our rules without telling me.
A fling?
I said, the word dripping with disbelief. You spent days with him, Viv. You lied to me, hid it all.
That's not a fling, that's you choosing him over me.
She crumpled then, her body folding in on itself as sobs shook her shoulders, and she sank into a chair at the table, burying her face in her hands.
I know. I was selfish and wrong. But I love you, Grant. I don't want to lose you.
My chest tightened, anger and grief knotting together, but I didn't let it sway me.
Love doesn't look like this, Viv. You don't destroy someone you love.
She looked up, her face a mess of tears and smudged makeup, her voice raw.
Please, can we try to fix this? Counseling, anything. I don't want to lose what we have.
I shook my head, the decision already taking root, solid and unmovable.
You lost it the second you decided I wasn't enough.
Her sobs grew louder, her body slumping further as she whispered, "What are you saying?
Are you leaving me?"
I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch out, thick and suffocating. Finally, I said, "I need time to figure this out.
But right now, being near you makes me sick."
She lifted her head, eyes pleading.
Grant, don't do this. We can work it out, I'll do anything.
I grabbed my keys from the counter, the metal cold against my palm, and headed for the door. I'll be at a hotel for a few days.
Don't call me.
Her voice broke as she called after me.
Wait, Grant, please, let's talk more. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn back. You said plenty, Viv. Now it's my turn to decide what happens next. I stepped outside, the Miami air hitting me like a wall, and let the door close behind me, the sound final, leaving her alone with the mess she'd made.
The hotel room offered no comfort or reprieve as I sat at the desk, staring at the laptop screen illuminating the details of Chase Kincaid's online existence with an unyielding glare. Every Instagram post featuring his self-satisfied smirk served as a constant, grating reminder of how he had inserted himself into my life and torn apart my marriage to Vivian. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus, an old college friend who had built a solid career in corporate law, someone I could rely on to handle sensitive matters without asking too many questions. After a brief conversation where I laid out my request for assistance in acquiring a stake in Kincaid Fitness Enterprises, keeping the personal stakes vague but stressing the need for absolute secrecy, he agreed to help me set up the necessary arrangements through a proxy. Over the following weeks, I redirected a substantial chunk of my personal savings into a shell company Marcus established specifically for this purpose, allowing me to slip into a silent fundraising round for Chase's business and secure a 30% ownership share without anyone noticing the transaction. Chase, consumed with maintaining his polished public image and pandering to his legion of followers, remained oblivious to the shift in power happening right under his nose. With that stake in my possession, I moved forward by insisting on a detailed audit of Kincaid Fitness Enterprises' financial records, determined to expose whatever dirt I could find buried in the numbers. I brought in Lisa, a forensic accountant known for her ability to dig up discrepancies no matter how well they were concealed, and gave her full access to the company's books, bank statements, invoices, and contracts. She didn't disappoint, quickly uncovering a trail of Chase's financial missteps, money diverted into personal accounts, contracts breached with reckless abandon, and a pattern of questionable dealings that painted a clear picture of his mismanagement. Armed with this evidence, I coordinated with Marcus to ensure the fallout would be as public and damaging as possible, timing it to coincide with Chase's latest high-profile event, a bootcamp launch broadcast live to his thousands of online followers. I watched the stream from my hotel room, splitting my screen between the live feed and a video call with Marcus and Lisa, waiting for the moment to unfold. Chase took the stage, exuding confidence and soaking in the crowd's enthusiasm, until a process server I'd arranged through Marcus stepped forward and handed him an envelope containing his termination letter and a notice suspending his branding rights, all captured in real time for his audience to witness. The online reaction was immediate and relentless, with news of Chase's collapse spreading across platforms faster than I'd anticipated, pulling Vivian into the mess right alongside him. Old screenshots of their flirtatious messages, once hidden in private exchanges, surfaced and circulated widely, tying her name to his disgrace in a way she couldn't escape. Companies that had once lined up to partner with her for endorsements began issuing statements to distance themselves from the scandal, while her social media accounts hemorrhaged followers as friends and casual acquaintances alike hit the unfollow button, leaving her digital presence in tatters. I sat back and observed the chaos unfolding, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and detachment as the consequences of her choices caught up with her, until a faint knock at my hotel room door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to see Vivian standing there, her eyes swollen and red, her usual composure replaced by a fragile, almost pitiful slump in her shoulders. "Grant, please," she said, her voice shaky and barely holding together as she stepped into the room at my gesture. "I know you're behind this. Why are you doing this to me?" She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands twisting together in her lap like she was trying to hold herself together. I stood near the desk, keeping my distance, and let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "You wanted someone more exciting," I said, keeping my tone even and free of any tremor, letting the weight of the statement settle over her. "Congratulations, you burned with him." She recoiled as if the words had physically struck her, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find a response. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was stupid, I know that now. But please, Grant, don't destroy everything I've worked for." Her plea came out in a rush, desperate and raw, but it didn't stir the anger I'd felt before, only a calm, almost clinical sense of finality. I looked at her, taking in the sight of the woman I'd once built a life with, now reduced to this broken figure pleading for mercy she hadn't shown me. "You destroyed our marriage, Vivian. This is just the consequence." She buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her frame, but I turned back to the desk, the laptop still open to the wreckage of Chase's empire, and let her cry. The VIP terminal lounge at Miami International Airport stood in stark contrast to the frenetic energy of the main concourses, offering a sanctuary of muted tones and cushioned seats where the distant murmur of voices barely registered above the ambient hush. I positioned myself by the expansive windows, gazing out at the planes maneuvering across the tarmac, their navigation lights pulsing faintly against the dimming sky of early evening. My suitcase had already been processed for the flight to Auckland, where I was set to embark on a new role with an airline focused on ecotourism and rugged adventure charters, an opportunity to shed the debris of my past and carve out something entirely my own. Yet, before I could board that aircraft and launch into the unknown, one unresolved matter demanded my attention, anchoring me momentarily to the life I was leaving behind. Vivian had reached out via text that morning, requesting a final meeting before my departure, and after some deliberation, I consented, stipulating it occur here in this detached, upscale lounge where the inevitability of my exit could frame our exchange. She arrived slightly delayed, her heels tapping a tentative rhythm on the sleek flooring do not disturb sign dangling from her purse as she closed the distance between us. She appeared diminished, her typical elegance unraveling at the seams, mascara streaked faintly beneath her eyes, her hair falling in uncharacteristically loose strands around her face. Pausing before me, she gripped her small purse tightly, as though it might steady her faltering resolve. "Grant," she began, her voice quivering on the edge of regret and resentment, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I motioned toward the seat opposite me, and she lowered herself into it with a rigidity that betrayed her unease, both of us enveloped in a silence thick with the gravity of unvoiced history. "I don't even know how to begin," she said after a pause, her gaze probing mine for any hint of yielding, any fracture in the defenses I had painstakingly constructed. I've been replaying everything: our marriage, my actions, the way I dismantled what we had. Leaning back in my chair, I kept my face impassive, unwilling to let her words breach the calm I'd cultivated. "There's no need to go over it again, Viv. We're both well aware of what transpired." She shook her head, tears pooling once more in her eyes as she pressed on. "But I need you to know I never intended to wound you. I acted out of selfishness and foolishness, letting myself get swept into something fleeting and hollow. Chase was just an escape, a way to fill the emptiness I couldn't confront." Her confession landed heavily, stirring the lingering ache of her infidelity, though I refused to let it show, having exhausted myself with months of rage and sorrow until this moment brought an unexpected lucidity and release from her hold. "You can say that now," I responded, my tone even and measured, "but when you were with him, my feelings didn't factor in. You didn't consider the damage it would inflict on us. You chose, Viv, and we're both living with the consequences." Biting her lip, she brushed a trembling hand across her cheek to catch a tear. "I know. I'm so sorry, Grant. If I could undo it, I would, but all I can do now is beg for your forgiveness, even if I haven't earned it." I studied her intently, seeing the remnants of the woman I'd once cherished, now fractured by her own missteps, and felt a fleeting urge to offer solace, though the sting of her betrayal kept me at a distance. "Forgiveness isn't something I can hand over on demand," I told her. "It's a process I have to navigate myself, and I'm not there yet." She nodded, her posture sagging with resignation. "I get it. I just didn't want you to leave believing I never cared for you. I did, Grant. I still do, even if it's tangled up in my own failures." Her words lingered, stirring a brief sorrow for what we'd squandered, though it swiftly gave way to the stark reality of her actions. "Love doesn't deceive or hide," I said quietly. "What you did wasn't love, it was self-interest." She recoiled slightly but didn't counter, instead retrieving a small envelope from her purse and sliding it across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, leaving it untouched for the moment. "It's the divorce papers," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I've signed them. I know it's what you've been waiting for." I stared at the envelope, the weight of its contents settling over me. This marked the definitive end of our union, the formal dissolution of a shared existence. I'd anticipated relief, yet a muted hollowness pulsed in my chest instead. "Thank you," I said, slipping the envelope into my jacket pocket. "My lawyer will take it from here." She nodded, eyes fixed downward. "So this is really it, then?" Standing, I adjusted my jacket, signaling the close of our exchange. "Yes, I believe it is." She rose too, her movements deliberate and slow. "Can I hug you one last time?" After a beat of hesitation, I agreed, and she stepped forward, her arms encircling me, briefly conjuring memories of brighter days, shared laughter and ambitions, before they dissolved under the weight of her choices. She drew back, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. "I hope you find what you're looking for out there, Grant. You deserve that much." I offered only a slight nod in reply, then turned toward the gate, sensing her eyes tracking me as I walked away. Though I didn't glance back, the chapter firmly closed. At the boarding area, the flight attendant greeted me with a practiced smile, scanning my pass and ushering me through, and I settled into my business class seat, preparing for the hours ahead. As the plane rolled toward takeoff, I peered out the window, watching Miami recede into a shrinking grid of lights, this departure crystallizing as the threshold of a new phase, free from the burdens of betrayal and a life that no longer fit. I leaned back, the steady drone of the engines easing me into a quiet stillness, the first taste of unencumbered possibility in months washing over me as I drifted toward whatever awaited in New Zealand.